April 23, 1945. The war in Europe had 8 days left, though nobody kneeling in that Bavarian field knew it yet. German boys, their ages ranging from 12 to 16, pressed their knees into the muddy ground and waited to die. The youngest among them trembled so violently that the second-hand Wehrmacht jacket hanging from his thin shoulders seemed to flutter in a wind that wasn't blowing. Theodor Neumann, 14 years old, kept his eyes fixed on the dirt between his hands. He had been taught in Hitler Youth that American soldiers showed no mercy to captured Germans. The instructors had shown them photographs, told them stories of executions and torture. Now, listening to the heavy boots of American soldiers moving behind him, Theo believed every word. His throat felt tight, making it difficult to swallow. He wanted to be brave, to die as a soldier for the fatherland, but his hands wouldn't stop shaking. Next to him knelt Wilhelm Schneider, barely 12, who had been handed a rifle 3 weeks ago that was taller than he was. Wilhelm's mother had sewn extra fabric into his uniform pants because the standard issue kept falling down. Now those same pants were soaked with mud and something else. Fear had stolen the last of his childhood dignity. The American soldiers had found them attempting to defend a bridge that had already been destroyed. Their commanding officer, a gaunt man of 19 who looked 40, had fled during the first exchange of gunfire. The boys had thrown down their weapons immediately, raising hands that still bore the dirt from digging useless trenches. They had been marched here, to this field 3 kilometers from the nearest village, where the spring grass was just beginning to show green beneath the gray remnants of winter. Lieutenant Elliot Pemberton stood 20 feet behind the kneeling boys, watching them shake. He was 26 years old, a schoolteacher from Pennsylvania who had spent the last 2 years leading men through France and into Germany. He had seen things that would never leave him: burning towns, mass graves, the hollow eyes of concentration camp survivors. He had also seen what hatred did to young minds, how it poisoned them from within. His sergeant, a tough Brooklyn native named James Kowalski, stood beside him. "Orders, sir?" Kowalski asked, his voice neutral but his eyes questioning. Pemberton looked at the boys, at their thin necks, at their trembling shoulders, at the way the smallest one was crying silently, tears cutting clean tracks through the dirt on his face. These were not soldiers. These were children, fed on lies and dressed in uniforms that didn't fit, sent to die for a cause that was already ash. "Get the field kitchen," Pemberton said quietly. "Tell them we need 14 portions. And tell them to make it good." The confusion rippled through the American ranks as soldiers dismantled their firing positions and brought forward supply crates instead. A portable stove appeared, carried by 2 privates who exchanged bewildered glances but followed orders. The smell of cooking oil began to drift across the field, strange and out of place, like music at a funeral. Theo kept his eyes closed, waiting for the bullet. Minutes passed. Then more minutes. The trembling in his legs had turned to numbness. He could hear sounds he couldn't identify, metal on metal, voices speaking in English with tones that seemed almost casual. Was this some kind of torture? Were they being made to wait on purpose, to suffer longer? "All right, boys. On your feet." The English words came from directly in front of them now. Theo opened his eyes and saw boots, American boots, but the soldier was crouching down, his face level with Theo's own. Lieutenant Pemberton's eyes were brown and tired, but not cruel. Not the eyes of a monster. "Stand up," Pemberton repeated, this time in German. His accent was rough but understandable. "Nobody's going to shoot you." Slowly, like wounded animals, the boys rose. Their legs could barely hold them. Wilhelm fell immediately, caught by an American private who steadied him with surprising gentleness. The boys looked around, trying to understand what was happening. Tables had been set up. On them sat plates, actual plates, not mess tins, piled with fried chicken, potatoes, green beans that still steamed in the cooling air. There was bread, real white bread, not the sawdust mixture they'd been eating for months, and water, clear water in clean canteens. "Sit," Pemberton said, gesturing to logs that had been arranged as benches. Eat. Nobody moved. The boys stared at the food like it was a hallucination. Franz Muller, 15, who had once dreamed of being a violinist before his hands learned to hold grenades instead, spoke first. Why? His voice cracked on the single word. Pemberton pulled up a log and sat down across from them, making himself vulnerable, making himself equal. Because you're hungry, he said simply. Because the war is almost over. And because you're children who should be in school, not in uniforms. Theo looked at Wilhelm, who looked at Franz, who looked at the others. Slowly, with the caution of wild things approaching a trap, they moved toward the tables. The first boy to touch the food was Heinrich Weber, 13, whose father had died at Stalingrad. He picked up a piece of chicken with both hands and bit into it. The taste, rich, seasoned, real, broke something inside him. Tears streamed down his face as he chewed, unable to stop eating, unable to stop crying. Then they were all eating, frantically at first, then slower as their stomachs adjusted to actual nourishment. American soldiers stood nearby, not as guards but as servers, refilling plates, offering more bread. Sergeant Kowalski watched Wilhelm struggle with a chicken leg too big for his small hands and quietly cut it into pieces for him. Pemberton ate with them, sharing their table, answering their questions in his broken German. He told them about Pennsylvania, about teaching history to students not much older than they were. He told them the war would be over soon, that they would go home, that they would have a chance to become something other than soldiers. What happens to us now? Theo asked, finally finding his voice. Prisoner of war camp, Pemberton said honestly, but a real one, with the Red Cross, with food and medical care. You'll be there until your families can be found, until Germany can take care of you again. And then? Franz asked. Then you build something new, Pemberton said. You take what you've learned, all of it, the good and the terrible, and you make sure it never happens again. You become teachers, builders, fathers. You become the generation that chooses differently. As the sun began to set over the Bavarian field, the boys sat surrounded by their enemy, full for the first time in weeks, and something shifted in the stories they had been told. If Americans were monsters, why had they been fed? If hatred was the only truth, why had they been shown mercy? Years later, Theodor Neumann would stand in a classroom in Hamburg, teaching history to students who had never known war. He would tell them about the field, about the fried chicken, about the American lieutenant who chose to see children instead of enemies. Wilhelm Schneider would become a social worker, dedicating his life to helping troubled youth, always remembering the moment someone chose to help him instead of destroy him. Franz Muller would pick up his violin again and play in the Berlin Philharmonic, his music a testament to second chances. In 1975, Pemberton received a letter. It was signed by 12 men, the survivors of that day, now fathers and professionals, scattered across a rebuilt Germany. They had found each other, tracked him down, wanted him to know that the seeds he had planted had grown into forests. You gave us our lives twice, the letter read. Once when you chose not to take them, and again when you showed us that hatred was not inevitable, that humanity could exist even in inhumanity. We have told our children about you. They will tell theirs. The choice you made in that field will echo until the last of us is gone, and even then in the stories we leave behind. Pemberton kept that letter in his desk drawer until the day he died. Sometimes, late at night, he would take it out and read it, remembering 14 frightened boys in a muddy field, remembering the moment he chose mercy over protocol, humanity over hatred. He never considered himself a hero. He had simply done what seemed right in that moment, what his conscience demanded. But in that choice, in that single meal, he had proven that even in war's darkest hour, even when the world seemed consumed by cruelty, one person's decision to see the humanity in others could change everything. The bullets that never flew that day gave life not just to 14 boys, but to their children, their grandchildren, to all the futures that branched from that moment of grace. The war ended 8 days later, The chicken bones were long since buried in that Bavarian field. But the memory lived on.